So now we come up with the technique. We go, okay, you're in the gray zone. How long have you been there? So this is great for him because now he could get out of the here and now. He doesn't have to take responsibility for the moment. You're giving him a break. How did you get? He said, well, I don't know. I think I was like this all day. So you do the preceding scenario. And then you get him back to the shame moment. And when you get him to the aha moment, that's when he wakes up. And you see that shift. And then you have something to work with. Now he comes into the room. Now he's present. You, me, here, now. When you go from shame to grief, what is the person grieving? What the person is grieving is the events that happened in his life, the deprivations and the abuse that happened in his childhood that set him up for homosexual enactment. Grieving is, this is what happened to me. And I have to sit with that. It's really sitting with the client. Now sometimes they will cry, sometimes they won't cry. They'll just sit there. And you sit with them, and you take time with that. And it doesn't mean they're going to do it in one session. We may have to revisit it. People say, how long does a grief work last? It lasts as long as the client needs to go back to it. But whenever they sit there, and this is one of the characteristics of good grief work, if you stay long enough, and if you have enough time in a particular session, they kind of recoup. It's not denial. It's not like there's like a clarity, a new strength, a new understanding, meaning transformation. They see things differently. They see things differently. And that changes the nature of homosexual enactment. When they do this long enough, when they're here, they go, I know I am here. I'm here because 3 hours ago I was there. Now they may say in the beginning, I'm going to do it anyway. I know it's about what that guy said earlier, but you know what, I'm going to go indulge. But while he's indulging it, he knows better. And it changes the nature of the experience. See, when you know, you can't unknow. Okay, an example. You're sitting in front of the television and you're hungry, 8 o'clock at night, watching Fox News, hopefully. And you're watching Gretchen, whatever her name is, and suddenly you have an appetite. And you remember that there's that slice of pie in the refrigerator. And you go and eat it. And while you're eating it, you're saying, I'm hungry, I'm eating it. Rewind the tape. You're sitting there, and you say, I'm hungry. And then you realize, you know, I'm really not hungry. I'm bored. I'm bored with the stupid Fox News. You know? But there's that piece of cake. But I'm going to go eat it. But while you're eating it, you know you're not hungry, you're eating it out of boredom. Of those two scenarios, when does the cake taste better? When you think you're hungry or when you know you're bored? When you're hungry, because it validates it. So if you say, I'm gay, I'm doing this because I'm gay, you're going to really get into it because of your identity. But when you say, I'm doing this because of this, and I'm denying this, you don't get the pleasure. I mean, what was Drescher, Jack Drescher, the gay psychiatrist? He has this whole list of disagreements with me. One of which is, Nicolosi takes the pleasure out of gay sex. That's what they're paying me for. It's such an insult. The line that goes from S to G is anger at the other, sadness for myself. That's the process. Grief work, coming out of shame and doing grief work, is anger at the other, sadness for myself. What goes from grief to shame, which is what you don't want, is anger at myself, sadness for the other. I hurt the other person. I disappointed my parents. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that. So feeling empathy for the other and turning it against yourself is always going in the direction of shame. So when you're working with the client, you're watching that he doesn't switch those two. You're always going in that. And that's where you want to, again, toward grief, sometimes grief is so overwhelming that they will generate a shame-based self-statement just so they can go back here. It's miserable, but it's familiar. So feeling and expressing anger in the session is part of the grief work. Anger is a part. But it has to be focused anger. Who are you angry at? In order for an affect to be discharged appropriately, the client has to know who it's directed toward. Because if it's just anger for its own sake, it's not productive. He has to have the image of who he's angry with. And the therapist has to know that that makes sense. You're not just angry at yourself. Or, okay, you want to be angry at God, be angry at God. But inevitably that anger to God is going to be towards someone else. Or anger toward the therapist, inevitably that's going to go towards someone else, where it needs to go. And once they start doing grief work in the session, they will report suddenly during the week feeling overwhelmed with sadness. Sometimes it scares them. Sometimes it's too much for them to handle, so you go slowly. But you want to build in, as part of the whole treatment, is you need to start to get good quality men who understand and support you. The gay affirmative therapists say, your body is arousing and that's who you are. We say, go underneath your bodily arousal. Feel, go deeply. What's there? And it's always grief. When we do pornographic images, they get aroused, then the arousal drops to nothing, and that's when they want to quit. That's where you get the most resistance. Okay, there's nothing else, that's it, I guess that's it. No, stay with it. Stay with the image, stay with your body, and then they drop to sadness. And the sadness is about what I did not get. That the homosexual fantasy is a reparation, from the word reparative therapy, it's a reparation for the grief, for the loss. See, that's what the gay man doesn't want to have to deal with. He wants to keep his identity at the surface level. And again, let's go back to Freud. Freud said, again, his definition of the repetition compulsion. The repetition compulsion has three elements. Number one, it's an attempt at self-mastery. First I'll give you the definition of Freud, and then we'll see how it applies to reparative therapy. Repetition compulsion has three elements. Self-mastery, trying to conquer something. Number two, self-punishment. And number three, it's a defense against something else. So our clients go back and forth between 1 and 2. I'm pursuing the guy, but he rejects me. I'm looking for gay sex, but it's not satisfying. I do it again, I go back and forth. So in our model, the self-mastery is mastery of that masculinity, mastery of that gender deficit. But it's self-destructive. It's self-defeating. It's self-punishing. It's the fulfillment of the shame that I really am not worthy. I only deserve to be punished for not being loved. The child, remember, the child, I deserve to be punished for not being loved. I take the blame that my parents don't love me. So in the 1 and 2, you have the narcissistic fantasy of mastering. If I can get this guy to love me, it'll make up for all the other men that rejected me. It's like the compulsive gambler. If I can only win this, I'll get back all my losses. It's symbolic. So that's the narcissistic illusion. Number 2 is the shame-based distortion. And Freud said it's a defense against something else. Well, the something else is the grieving of the past. The fact is, you never will get it here. You never did get it, and so you're not going to get it. You never did and you never will. So go grieve it. And the resolution of grief is choosing to go on living anyway. That's what the client will tell you. I give up the illusion of homosexual enactment, I face my grief, and I choose to live anyway. I choose to make my life the best I can in spite of all that happened to me. And I don't blame anyone, but I have to now go forward with all this truth about myself. That's the end of the psychotherapy. When the client is ending the therapy, toward the very end of the therapy, he learns to do the SBSS process on his own. He doesn't need the therapist to walk him through it. So in the course of the week, somebody says something, he feels that drop, he says, okay, what am I saying to myself? See, one of the interesting things, he learns that nobody really shames you. No one shames you, you shame yourself. People will do things and say things, but you have to turn that into a shame-based self-statement. So nobody is shaming, we say, Children are shamed, but adults shame themselves. So he says, okay, if I'm feeling a drop now, what am I telling myself? And he comes up with it consciously. He looks at it and either dismisses it or really feels the loss in that for a moment. He could do it real quick, real easy, and return to the assertion. By that time, he's done all his major grief work, so he's not going to go into a major grief. He's going to feel that little, ugh, yeah, that reminds me, ugh. But it lasts very quickly, and he comes back to his assertion, so he can do it on his own. Thank you very much. Thank you.